to today's presentation of Day 4 slides. We have Session 5, Demand, Supply, and EQ. And in case you don't know what EQ is by now, I've overlooked it in a previous video. It's the economic quotient, which is a comparison, or as we use it in math, a ratio that compares your current as we're talking about demand, is going to be your current demand compared to demand either for other goods or services or in other locations in the world. So it can be something that is a geographic comparison, or it can just be a simple numbers comparison. So when we talk about demand, demand is a relationship between various prices and the quantities consumers are willing and able to buy during some time period. The demand curve is just a graph or a picture of the demand. So if you were in class with us yesterday, we had a discussion about the price of computers. Computers are something that is in a high demand in our society. There's several options that are available. They've gone down a little bit as far as an introduction of tablets into the market, but they're relatively inexpensive, and they are something that's fairly common in the American household. Well, yesterday we said hypothetically, if the price of computers went up to $1,200 per computer instead of $400, then the demand for new computers would be greatly reduced, because people would not be willing to pay $1,200 to upgrade. They would probably just use that old computer another year or two and hope that the price comes back down. So when you're talking about what consumers are willing and able to buy, that is really what is driving demand. Usually when the price goes down, demand goes up until you reach a point where the market is saturated. In general, people get less satisfaction, or economists have a word for it called utility, from additional units of a good or service. Meaning, when in the computer example, if they already have one at home, they're less likely to pay that $1,200 to get a new one instead of the $400 they paid last year to get the old one they have at home. However, if something happens and they just don't have a computer at all, or say lightning comes in and hits your computer and it's no good anymore, then you're more likely to want to pay $1,200. If you have a $400 computer at home, you're probably going to be comparing the $1,200 computer to it constantly, and you wouldn't be as happy about the more expensive computer. And so there's actually a law for this, and it's called diminishing marginal utility. So as people get more of something, they value the additional unit less and less. And so that does not violate the Pick principle, which means that you always want more of everything. There comes to a point where you're just limited. Suppose at your house you have 4 kitchen chairs around the table. Well, if you have a mother, a father, and 3 children, then 4 kitchen tables is not enough. So you'd want to demand another kitchen table. But suppose you go out and you buy 2 more kitchen chairs, and you set them around the kitchen table and everyone has a chair. You probably wouldn't want to go out and buy more and more chairs to go with that table to clutter up the kitchen. And as we all know, you have to move them when you mop anyway. So that's just saying that you're going to reach a point of saturation, and then you're going to have a diminishing marginal utility, or you're not so into getting more kitchen chairs because you have enough and you're satisfied. The third point about demand today is price, is the amount of money that buyers actually pay for a good or service. So remember, price is different than cost. Price is different than profit. we talked yesterday, if we were selling snow cones and we were talking about what it would cost us to make the snow cones and then what we would charge to students to buy snow cones, then that difference would be profit. But the amount that the track team or the football team paid for snow cones after practice, that would actually be price. A couple more things about demand that we're going to talk about. Buyers will buy units of a good or service as long as the amount of satisfaction that the buyer gains from the purchase is greater than the price that they must pay for the good. They will not buy when the opposite is true. So, if we were deciding that, we were deciding that we were going to make potholders and sell them for profit. And we've been making potholders and we've cleared a small profit at home, and we've been selling them out for craft stores and at gatherings. If it ever comes to the point that it costs us more to buy the loops to make the potholder than people are willing to pay for the potholders, then this would be true. So our demand for loops would go way down because we are going in the hole, and that's not advantageous to us. And so for number 5, the demand curve reflects the law of demand. As the price or good or service decreases, buyers buy more of it. And as the price of a good or service increases, buyers buy less of it. So suppose that you are a person that really likes video games and you've been paying $60 for video games, and suddenly they're cut down to $30. You're used to buying them at $60, so you feel like that's a really good deal, so you might buy 2 of them at $30. So that demand curve would show as the price came in half, then you doubled the demand, and that would show up on your graph as a curve. Now, you can't have demand without talking about supply. So supply is something that's really going to be cost-driven. Cost is defined by what's given up, or opportunity cost, in order to acquire that new good or service. So we talked about that a little bit. If you're working a job and you work so many hours, say 10, and you bring home $60, you're really going to think about what you want to spend that $60 on. Is it going to be worth it? Are you going to be satisfied with that item? Since you've invested all that time, you want to make sure that you spend your $60 on something that you feel is worth 10 hours of your time. Cost is not a single number concept. Units of a good or service will have different costs. So it can have that time investment cost, or if you just receive that money in a birthday card, it would just be a monetary cost because you didn't have any time invested in that money that then translate into goods or services. In general, the cost society occurs from additional units of a good rises because more of other goods or service must be given up. So what that means is, if you're generally a video game player and you're investing 10 hours at Hardee's or Wendy's in order to clear enough money after taxes to buy a video game, 10 hours is a lot of time. But if they start going up and say they went up to $120, then that would mean 20 hours. You would probably think twice about buying the second video game at $120 because it would take you so much more additional time to earn that money. Number 4, the cost curve shows the additional cost society incurs from each individual unit of the good or service. So how you read it is you read vertically up, and then you're going to read over. And that's how you're going to read that supply and demand curve. And you've already seen that in a previous video. Supply shows how sellers react to various prices of a good or service. So again, we talked about if the price of the video games doubled, you would have a reaction because that would mean instead of working 10 hours to earn one, you would have to work 20, and so you'd be least likely to buy. However, if the price of video games dropped to $30, then you could invest 10 hours and have 2 games, so you're more likely to buy the 2 games at $30 than you are to buy 1 game at $120. Sellers will produce units of a good or service when the cost of production for one more unit is less than the price they're able to charge for that unit. So remember, price minus cost gives profit. So as long as they can continue to make a profit, it is in the interest of the manufacturer to produce more. They will not produce when the opposite is true. So if they're going to lose money on each unit, they are likely to stop production, and that will drop supply. The cost curve reads horizontally over and then down. So that's going to go to the right over and then down to watch the cost curve. It shows the amount sellers would produce and offer for sale at various prices, and thus is also the supply curve for the good. So they're only going to produce as many as they can make a profit for. So that means that supply drops off when profit drops off. What will then happen is when supply decreases, demand usually will increase and costs will come back up. The supply curve reflects the law of supply. As the price of a good or service decreases, sellers produce less of it because they're making less profit per unit. As the price of a good or service increases, sellers produce more of it because they will increase their profit. Think of it this way: if you made 50 cents clear on every snow cone, then the more snow cones you make, then the more that 50 cents a piece builds up. And if you're selling 10, then you've cleared $5. You made $5 in that amount of time. If you sell 20 of them, then you're going to make $10, and we'd all rather have a 10 than a 5. So as long as you're making a profit, then the incentive to keep producing goes up. Now, efficiency. Given the criterion of allocative efficiency, the demand and supply curves can be used to perform step 4 of the PACE decision-making model to evaluate alternative amounts of the good. So we're going to have a decision-making session where you're going to be given something that's going to help you make decisions. Decisions that we've talked about so far have been choices between wants and needs. They have been choices made by manufacturers based on whether they can make a profit or a loss. And so you can decide if something is efficient for you. So we're going to talk about the criteria to decide if something is efficient a little more in depth in another video. If the value to society of consuming a particular unit of a good or service exceeds the cost of producing that unit, then that unit should be produced. So it's something that society needs. So when you think about flu shots, you've probably heard about flu shots in the news, and then sometimes flu shots are unavailable, and then announcements are made in your community when they receive the serum to make the flu shots. Flu shots are something that's viewed as a benefit to society because flu is very dangerous for the elderly and the very young in our society. So the government provides an incentive to manufacturers of the flu serum because they deem that as something that's important for our society. And so we use that as an efficiency choice, that reason, to go ahead and produce that flu serum. Given the criterion of allocative efficiency, the decision-making model regarding how much of a good or service an economy should produce is based on the following. So, how much should you make? Okay. When the value gained from the last unit produced equals the cost of producing it, then the economy should produce the good or service. Okay, so that means that if you're going to decide whether to produce something, if you know that you can recoup your investment, okay, then you should go ahead and produce it if it has an effect on benefiting society. However, that's why the government has to offer incentives to some manufacturers, because most manufacturers are only going to look at the cost benefit. Are they making a profit over that cost? The government, however, may decide that something is so important that it should be produced even though they're only recouping their costs. So that is an example of when the institution of an economy will provide an incentive for supply to continue even though it's not a profitable item. So again, demand is the big driver of our economy. If there's no demand for a good or service, then nobody's going to produce it. You guys probably still remember VCR tapes. Well, there's really no demand now for VCR tapes. So I would imagine from the time that you were 4 or 5 and still watching VCR tapes, maybe at preschool or the babysitters, I imagine that back in those days there were several people who produced VCR tapes. Lots of goods were allocated to that, lots of resources and time. However, the demand has fallen for VCR tapes. So that is something that is not produced, and there's probably only one company that's still producing them, and it's probably something that the government has decided that they need, although the rest of us are not out buying VCR tapes. So demand is the quantity of a good or service that buyers are willing and able to buy at all possible prices during a certain time period. So if you go back to the computer example that we talked about yesterday, the demand for computers at $1,200 is going to be a lot less than demand for computers at $400, because buyers are not really willing to pay $1,200 for something if they feel that it is only worth $400. Okay, so here we have that lovely demand curve. You're looking at a couple of things. One is you're looking at price. So we're going to look vertical first. So at $20 for A, and let's say A is computers. If computers were $20 a piece, then your demand is going to be way up. If computers are $5,000 a piece, then your demand is over here close to zero. So very few computers are going to be sold at $5,000, whereas computers at $20, there's lots of demand. And so you can see here, we actually are telling you, in case you can't read these numbers, how they're working out. So at $5,000, we're selling 1 unit. At $20, we're selling 106 units. So I hope that this has cleared up information that you've seen on demand and has tied it into things that are easy to understand.